Hey, good morning, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It is season 2, episode 61. I'm Josh Hayes, here with my co-host Scott Moon. And today, the author of the Chronicles of Hawthorn fantasy series and the Lake Effect romance series, Rues, joins the show. Rues has been writing and publishing since 2013, and today she joins us to talk about her writing journey. Rues, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We were just talking about your name and going through customs in foreign countries and how that could make things adventurous and fun.
Yeah, that's one word for
it. Would you start off our show here by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in writing?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually came from the film industry and television and teaching at a film school. So I was doing a lot of work with, script writing and working on television shows and movies and shorts. Then I got into teaching at a film school. And while I really liked the combination of the writing and the visual, I really felt like the depth of character comes to life more in the novel fiction book world. And so when I left the film school teaching environment, that's when I started writing my own stuff, novel kind of stuff, and really getting more into character development and the kinds of things that you can't really do in a film, where you have to compress things into these little 90-minute bundles, or you have to put things in a 22-minute TV episode. It's not the same thing when you can get into a character and a world and a story in a book. So that's
harder to get into people's heads sometimes in the film medium, as far as
it becomes this real campy thing where somebody's narrating everything. When you're trying to do internal dialogue in film, you go into this whole narration world, and it works for some stories, but it can be a little campy. Whereas in the fiction world, if you have a character who's got a lot of internal dialogue, readers are used to that because they're used to reading what's inside a character's head. So it's a little bit different.
So you wrote screenplays and movies, or what was your involvement there?
Yeah, that's I worked on those projects. None of my screenplays were made into films.
Okay.
That my genius was overlooked.
So. As it happens, yes.
But I wrote them, and then we did stuff at the film school where we would write little shorts, and they watch films where they're learning a certain technique, or they're learning a certain way to tell a story, and then we do some kind of a riff off of that. So we take something like Run Lola Run, and then we turn that into some kind of a zombie film, and so I would write those little things. But so that was kind of fun,
Oh yeah.
So then you transitioned into writing novel. Yeah, say it 3 times real fast. Go.
What are those words? A T word.
Transitioned into writing novels. You started, it looks like, doing a romance comedy. The Lake Effect series. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, that was the story of 2 sisters. One sister is gay, one sister's straight. They were raised by a super oppressive religious family, and it was kind of the story of their arrested development and having to find adulthood and just finding a way to cope with their whole situation through humor. So it has that comedic element, even though it's not a laugh out loud comedy kind of thing. They have their moments where that's kind of their coping mechanism as they travel through their little lives and find a way to be adults and get out from under the parents and all of that stuff.
And it looks like it won the IPPY award 2 years in a row, 2015 and 2016, that series. So congratulations.
Book 2 and book 3.
Awesome. Very nice. Very cool. Yeah. And then looks like you transitioned again into
stop saying that word,
into fantasy. With the Chronicles of Hawthorn, which you just released a new book, or getting ready to release the latest book in that series. Yes. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I love to travel for any possible reason. I'm just a wanderer, and so I had been to New Zealand once on my own, and then I went again with a friend, and I just was so taken by the scenery and the people and just all of the the different pieces of the puzzle of being in that place and all of the interesting parts of the country that I just sort of was simmering back there in the back of my brain. And then I just kind of started to see these characters that would be on this island that's cut off from the rest of the world by this magical field. And so they've sort of been trapped. Some of animals that now are extinct, like the giant moa, they would still be alive. And, just so little pieces of it just started to come to. And it became this kind of coming of age story for this daughter who she was born to, to fulfill this prophecy, but she doesn't have magic. And so the only way she can save her people is through this magic and defeating this evil sorceress, but she doesn't know, how to work her magic. So the story is how she kind of discovers that and how her friends support her and moving through that and finding out more and more about the world in each book. So they're a little bit shorter stories, about, anywhere from 200 to 240 pages per book. And there's 8 books in the series. Book 5 comes out in October. So it's rolling along.
That's very cool. I'm always interested in the young adult genre, ever since reading Harry Potter and those books, and seeing kind of how authors bring not only kids but then adults into their world. And I like them a lot of times, sometimes better than like George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire is a very, very good series, but sometimes you're just kind of bogged down by it. Whereas the other series, you could just snap along and you can enjoy the ride with it.
Yeah, and I always like the idea of people having to have support of their friends, where it's like they're not just this one person, they're the ones who are going to save the world. It's like they need these pieces of the puzzle that their friends bring to it to support them or to reveal things. And so I liked that world where there's a young girl and she's got a best friend and that type of a thing, where there's that kind of small circle of support, and then they have these different adventures together. And, fairies and flying horses and whatever. That's awesome. I love magic.
That's solid. Could just throw it in there. So is coming of age really important to young adults now? Josh and I'm like Josh. I've read a lot of it. I've never tried to write too much of it. And we get asked a lot, what makes something a YA book? And I'm assuming that's one of the elements.
Well, it feels like it is to me, because it always feels like they're on that sort of little tippy place between being a child and being an adult. And they're kind of trying to find their way and figure out what it means to grow up and what it means to, hashtag adulting. So it kind of feels a little bit like that. So for me, it's the age of the character and the topics they're dealing with. I feel like when you get into that new adult and college age kind of, there's always way more sex involved. And so for me, I was more interested in telling the story of their world and their magic and their culture and all of that. And so I felt like bringing the ages down, kind of putting it in the young adult versus new adult college age would give me that opportunity. So that's where I went with it.
Did you set out specifically to do the YA, or did it just because of the nature of the characters and the story?
I did with this one, yeah. Okay. Just because of the fact that I knew there were going to be 8 books, and I kind of knew where I wanted her to end up age-wise. And I was like, okay, so this is where she's going to start, and we'll move her through the series.
So tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this series. Romance and fantasy are kind of 2 different ends of the spectrum when it comes to writing. What made you want to make that change?
I think it's probably ADD is probably the quickest answer to that question.
Scott and I can probably both attest to that.
We're right there. As you might get, as we keep interrupting you, we're probably right on
that. Yeah. It's shiny keys. I don't know. I like reading everything, including nonfiction. I like lots of different things. And so when I wrote the romance series, that was great. That was fun. I love those characters. It was interesting to see the sisters develop through the series. And then I was like, need something different now. And I felt like with the fantasy, I don't know, there was just a whole avenue that I hadn't explored yet. Like I said, I love magic, and I always, having come from the TV film side of things, I was always just a little frustrated with how they portrayed magic and witches. It's always always got to be about sacrificing things and blood things, and just like
right,
and really
pentagrams and all that stuff.
Yeah, and really like that more nature-based magic is just kind of about being in tune with the environment and seasonal things and the movement of stars and planets, and so there's more of a connection versus the kind of antagonistic, the evil witch thing that we always get in the Disney and that sort of thing. So I, wanted to tell my version of that thing.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of different types of magic. I mean, we have high fantasy, there's low fantasy, low magic fantasy, which is kind of a newer thing that's been around. And then and I think a lot of fantasy has the coming of age is very popular in just any fantasy. It seems like I'm thinking of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series.
Yes, I love that series. Yeah.
Very long.
Very long. Yeah, I don't think I can do 13 books. My attention span is definitely not going to make it that long. I'm going to really just have to buckle down to do 8 books.
8 books is a lot. I normally start throwing that out because I'm trying to bait Josh into a Brandon Sanderson fanboy rant because
it's not gonna work, Scott.
Oh no, I got you. I got your number.
It might work. I'm interested to talk about this magic system that you're describing because, like Scott just mentioned, I'm a huge Sanderson fan. Stormlight Archives is one of my favorite series. Mistborn was a great series, and those magic systems are pretty well laid out. The Song of Ice and Fire, the magic system is there, but it's not really laid out properly for you to understand what's going on. Like some crazy witch in a red suit takes some blood-sucking leeches and burns them, and what's going on with this, and no one knows. So
that's it. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Leeches.
Give me some sparkly powder. So what is the magic system involved in your world, and to kind of go through the process of how you came up with it?
So the way I set it up is I kind of based it on the idea that in her world, everyone's born with magic, and it's very rare for someone not to be born with magic. So that's its own little issue and problem, those few people that don't have magic. But generally, everyone's born with magic, and so when they come of age, which would be 13, 14, they can go and be tested by the elders and see if they pass the tests. Then they can enter the training system, and then they can learn all the underlying bits and pieces to how to use magic, how to write their own spells, how to conduct a ceremony, how to be in tune with the seasons, and all of that kind of training that would then allow them to become more adept. So their system of magic is based on words and spell components and education. So you have to learn more, you have to be able to understand more. And then there's going to be people in the community that are more like that mentor kind of a character who is older and wiser and has information and can share things. But that for the main character, her magic doesn't work like everyone else's. And so they don't think she has magic. That's the whole problem with her. And so for her, uncovering the secrets of her own magic is going to be different than everyone else's. And that's the key, essentially, to how the whole story unfolds, is how she's different and why she's different and what that means to the whole society. Because there's, of course, in another island separate beyond their protective magical cloud, there is evil coven who's trying to steal their book of magic and that type of thing. So there was one whole book of magic, the Book of Light and Shadow, and it was torn in half, and the islands were separated, and the magical cloud came up, and so the evil coven has the Book of Shadow, the Coven of the Sacred Wood has the Book of Light. They want to reunite it and bring balance. The evil coven wants to destroy the Book of Light. So it's that.
Oh, that's battle. Very cool.
I like that a lot.
That is. So on this world, these 2 islands, are they the only 2 islands, or is there more out there that you could explore later? Or
it's in the series, it's really just those 2 places, but they're part of a bigger world. The island that's hidden by the magical cloud, they have had no contact with outsiders for hundreds and hundreds of years, since the rift, since the cloud came up and separated them from everyone, basically protecting the Book of Light from anyone getting it. But on the other island, they've found creative ways to interact with passing ships and things like that, but still protect them from outside forces. So they have had some interaction. So they have some other modern items, but then pterodactyls still are alive on their part of the island, you know. Right. But there's many fewer people because there was more battling and more killing, and you know, that's the type of thing. So they're not as harmonious. There's not as much magic because the high priestess of that coven kills people who show magic that don't come to her side, you know, sort of thing. So she's kind of her own worst enemy because she's depleting her potential supporters in an effort to keep people from taking her power, you know, kind of thing. Whereas in the Northern Island, they're training people and they're more of a community and they work together and, you know, that type of thing.
Magic and dinosaurs is always a really, really good combination.
I know, it's cool. Yeah. I'm over dragons. I want pterodactyls and giant moa and megalodon sharks. I mean, I don't know.
Oh yeah. Shark, go right into Shark Week.
Sharknado.
Shark Week.
Sharknado.
Sharknado and Shark Week. So a lot of times we do spoilers on accident, and then what we do is we give the spoiler, and then we say, by the way, spoiler alert. So we don't want to drop bait you into a spoiler alert, but so I'm curious. The rest of the world has kind of moved on then, and so because I'm always fascinated, it's like what's beyond, you know, like in the Game of Thrones, I'm like, well, how far, if you went far enough east, what would you see? And of course, that hasn't been written yet. But so as I get this is kind of a pocket in our contemporary world with magic, and elsewhere there maybe there is or isn't.
Yeah, I would say even though there's this pocket, it's still not a contemporary world. It's still a world of the, you know, big sailing ships and that sort of thing. So it's still a past world, but they're way in the past, you know. So they're I
like that. There's been several series based kind of in that Napoleonic era type fantasy stuff that I like and enjoy also and stuff.
It's interesting because I think it's really the dinosaur aspect is really cool to the magic. I just searched Amazon and there's only one other Dinosaur Fantasy and it's not YA. So you may have like the lockdown on the YA.
I've created my own genre. Yeah, that's a curse actually.
It could be a curse. Yes, it could be.
That's my problem. I'm not mainstream enough. I'm not writing to market. So dang it.
That's a very popular trend right now. But you always want to be like the first John Grisham or Tom Clancy who makes your own genre and then you just dominate.
Who wouldn't?
That would be cool. You know, try to do it.
I agree with the entire right to market thing, but there comes a point when there's too many people writing to market and you're getting too many of the same thing, and there's not. So it's interesting to me that and fun when people do different things, and then you can go and read brand new genres like young adult fantasy dinosaur books and
fantasy dinosaur books.
All right,
get out there, but. You know, in what you're describing, I can see it's probably more mainstream than it sounds on the surface, because as far as having a large appeal to readers, because it has all those elements like we talked about, the inherent conflict of coming of age, the automatic dilemma with the character who doesn't have magic when everybody else does, and
and her mother's the high priestess, and you know, she can't take over as high priestess unless she has magic. She can't solve up. She can't defeat the evil coven. She can't do any of these things unless she can find her magic and you know, be able to save her people. So it's kind of like the conflict between the mother and daughter, of course, because the mother is this all-powerful high priestess of the sacred coven, you know, and then the daughter is just like, oh, I can't do anything. And little 2-year-olds are running around floating teapots, and you know, she's like, yeah, I got nothing over here.
Struggling to keep up. Vicky Malone Kennedy just showed up in our chat room. She's one of our regular viewers. She says she got here late and she wants to know, do you write adult books and YA books under the same name, or do you use a pseudonym or something else? Now, we kind of talked about this in the pre-show about pseudonyms, so this might be a good time to get into that. That's very interesting. actually.
Yeah, as of right now, I do not use a pseudonym or a pen name or anything. Rue is my legal name. That's my full legal name. I only have one name. I don't have a last name. That's correct. No last name. Because generally when I say, it's Rue, it's just Rue. I don't have a, and what's your last name? Yeah, still no last name. Like you can keep asking. It's still not going to just magically appear.
Nothing's going to change by asking the question again.
Right. So right now, I have not done anything under a pen name. And, maybe I should have because I did such different genres, romance and YA fantasy. But I didn't, I don't know. I didn't feel like it was really necessary. So for now, everything I write and publish is as Rue, my actual real name.
I think that's fascinating, and you had mentioned that there's some pros and cons to having just one name.
Yeah, there is. I mean, most of the time it's fine. If I'm handling my own business, it doesn't ever seem to be a problem. But when I have to interact with highly regulated agencies, like I recently went to Mexico on a writing retreat, and when I went through customs, that's a culture where you have 4, 5, 6 names, all the different pieces of your family are all wadded into your name so that everyone's identified. And they look at your passport and it's always the same expression. I know it's coming because I see them take the passport and they look at it and then they look at it again and start to look up at you like something's not happening here. And yeah, that's correct. And then it's just M16s and federales, and we're going to take you into a back room, and you're like, oh, goody.
Because I got one name.
So I have to get out all my different forms of ID, and then they have to take pictures of things and scan things. And I think it's really just they want to show everyone else.
Right.
It's because nothing ever changes. Eventually, it's like, okay, well, you're good. Go ahead. It's like,
all right, we were going to let you go through anyway, but we just wanted to take a picture of your.
Yeah, because I think they just are like, what the hell?
Right.
So
it's mind blown.
It is mind blown for sure. I mean, it happens even coming back into this country. I mean, the U.S. agents, the same thing, and I'm just like, let me guess. One name. You're going to ask me about the. Yep, it's just the one. It's the real thing.
It's funny because people have some different names and stuff that come on the show, and like my last name is Moon, and my entire life I always have to spell my name if I'm talking on the phone or signing into a hotel or something. That's always because they think it's a joke or something, I guess.
I guess.
And they ask me to spell it 2 or 3 times, and I do, and I always feel like a dummy. But eventually we all become friends. And then
well, I always get like a whole series of, how when your name's Scott. So when you meet people and you say, I'm Scott, and they're like, hey, Scott, how's it going? Well, when I meet someone and then I say my name's Rue, they're like, oh, like Winnie the Pooh? It's like, nope. That's R-O-O, or I get, like the sauce? Nope, that's R-O-U-X. Like I have to have a whole series of responses. So people can't just accept the name and move on. They have to latch it onto something.
Getting closer, yeah.
So for everyone, it is an herb, a medicinal herb. It is called the herb of grace. The Spanish gypsies use it to treat poisonous snake bite. So there, you can attach it to that.
There you
nice.
Go. Like the snake bite herb. That's what I'll say.
Right? Sure, why not? But yeah.
So you weren't born with one name, and you had to get it legally changed. You said you had some kind of you had to get a congressman involved to get that out.
That was to get my passport. Yeah, it was very stressful because my son, who was at the time still a minor, he was like 16, so you have to have both of your parents sign everything when you get a passport. He was going to Germany with his best friend, and I was going to New Zealand. And so we all sent our paperwork in, and they were freaking out about my name, and then they decided that then he couldn't have his passport either because maybe I wasn't really his mom. So they held up both our passports. So, I live in Arizona. They kind of get off on having their own little world here in Arizona, like it's its own country. So I just called my congressman and I said, I just want you to know that the State Department is refusing to recognize the laws in the state of Arizona, and they will not issue my passport. 2 days later, passport issued. Bam.
Nice.
So yeah, they wouldn't issue it. It was ridiculous. So
started a civil war.
Did you have similar issues? I'm assuming you weren't born Rue, but did you have similar issues making that legal name stick?
Well, it was one of my birth names.
Okay.
So it wasn't that difficult. And like I said, in Arizona, they give you a lot more personal rights in that sense, you know, where you can just do things. So I just had to take my paperwork with me. So I had to take all my paperwork with me and go to the bank and be like, here's this. And then they gave me my thing, go to your driver's license, here's this. So that part wasn't too bad. It wasn't until I tried to deal with a federal agency. Like when I went in for the Social Security card, that was hilarious. That was like my stack of paperwork. And they're like, oh, you can't do this. I'm like, I think I can. So, and then, you know, supervisor, and then another supervisor. There's literally 6 people behind the counter. And I'm just like, awesome. Here's what we're going to do. Let's send in the paperwork and see what happens. 2 weeks later, had my card. You know, so it's like, it just blows people's mind. And then they're like, can't function. Don't know where to, no box for this.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah.
Because it doesn't fit into their normal,
their
normal thing. And
it doesn't. I get that. But it's just so funny to you just see the gears just go.
Right.
You can do it.
So when you'd mentioned possible pen names and different things, that you just chose your name. So do you think that has been like a neat branding tool to just have one name, or has that affected?
I don't know.
I keep thinking like the artist formerly known as Prince, you know,
right.
I'm just
there's no it seems to be an interesting branding tool, but like I was telling you, a lot of social media sites and things like that, I mean, you can't operate in their world if you don't have 2 names. So like with Facebook, I had to do Rues Corner. So people who don't know me and interact with me call me Rues. And it's like, well, you know, there's an apostrophe in there and whatever. But so it's kind of a little bit weird, I guess. And it does make it kind of strange. I remember on the front of the books, the cover designer was like, well, it doesn't look like an author name because it's not 2 names. So then a lot of my books say, you know, a novel or something above the name so that you can differentiate it. Like that's not the title of the book kind of thing. So I don't know. One day when I'm rich and famous and I've J.K. Rowling, I guess everyone will be like, oh, Rue, that was such a great idea.
And then everybody will be going to the Social Security office wanting one name.
Right.
They'll have a whole line dedicated to one line, one namers.
It's a whole lot more hassle than it's probably worth if it's not a real big deal to you.
Well, and I know Josh and I and most of the people watching the show right now are creatives and into the creative stuff, and so I like things that are a little bit different, and so that's why
I do too.
Spending so much time on this is just fascinating.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, I want to kind of get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of your writing, and I want to talk about our show sponsorship here really quick. This episode of Live is brought to you by our good friend Richard Fox and his Iron Dragoon novel, the first book in his Terran Armor Corps series. Just won the 2017 Dragon Award for Best Military Science Fiction or Fantasy Novel. That was pretty sweet.
Yeah.
The blurb goes like this: soldiers of the Terran Armor Corps wage war across the stars. Wired into mechanized battle suits, they fight the terrifying battles which must be won no matter the cost. Their deeds are legend, their reputation feared by the enemies of Earth and her allies, but how the Corps forges young men and women into mighty warriors is shrouded in mystery. Roland Shaw lost his parents to war, and he volunteers for the Armor Corps to honor their memory and discover how far he can push himself. To succeed, he must find the iron in his heart and prove himself worthy of the Corps. For the armor, there is no substitute for victory, and to fail is to die. The Iron Dragoons is an action-packed military science fiction novel, the first in the series by Richard Fox, author of the Ember War series. I will put both of the... oh, crap. I do have an overlay.
I'm like waiting for the overlay.
There's the overlay. It's a late overlay.
Oh, crap.
The late overlay is there.
Nice. There it is.
Now on the video feed. If you're listening on the audio feed later, sorry, you don't get the sweet overlay. But I will put both of the links. The first book, Iron Dragoons, is actually free, it looks like, on Amazon right now.
Which is extremely rare for Fox.
Which is extremely rare for Richard Fox. So the links are in the chat. I'd go and pick up both those books. Are out there, phenomenal books. I got to read Iron Dragoons as a beta before anybody else got to, so I was pretty excited.
It's in audiobook now, and I'm listening to the audiobook because Josh and I are both huge audiobook fans, and
Junkies.
it was through Richard, I think, that we got to interview Luke Daniels.
That is true. That is true.
It was a good time. So.
That was a really fun interview.
That was hilarious. We tortured that poor guy. He'd already been done 15 hours of narrating. We're like, hey, come on the show. You got a couple more hours in you. Why not?
What I love about that show is we convinced him to have a conversation between one of his characters from Richard Fox's Ember War series. I can't remember the name of the character right off the top of my head, and Elmo. So he was going back and forth about this alien, real gruff voice and Elmo, and was going back and forth. Hilarious.
That's awesome.
That was one of the Cargill, but then he did like Shakespeare from the Cargill's voice too. I saw
the Cargill. Yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
So good times,
crazy times on.
We want to talk about some writing process and marketing ideas and things.
Absolutely.
Vicky did ask if, and this may have already been answered, if the name and just the single name has any problem with publishers. Now, is that something? Are you self-publishing, or do you work with traditional publishers, or a hybrid of both?
I actually have a publishing company, so I set up an LLC that is my publisher.
So you can make the rules.
I'm a pretty cool boss. I'm just saying. Yeah. So no, and it really hasn't been. Like I said, when I do things myself online, online shopping, whatever, setting up account, it's usually fine. It's when I have to interact with people who can't process the information is where it gets all weird. And I get a lot of Rue stuff. Like, well, we have to have a last name, so we'll just put Rue twice. Really? Because I'm not Boudreaux Golly. Like, it's just Rue.
Just Rue.
But yeah, it hasn't been too much of a problem with that.
Excellent. So Josh has been dying. I can see him chomping at the bit to ask about kind of your writing process. And so
yes, I'm always interested, especially with world building of this magnitude, when you're talking about things that happened hundreds of years ago, and you've got to keep magic system straight, where you have a light and a dark side, or however you want to split it. What went into before you actually started writing? What went into the world building behind this, and then how do you keep track of all that through the books in the series?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm not a pantster at all. I'm a very much of a planner, plotter kind of person. And that's just sort of gives me the backbone structure, so that if things are happening in the writing process and something kind of goes in a direction, I was like, oh, I didn't really see that, and that'll work out great. I'm all about that. But as far as in a series like this, where I knew there were going to be 8 books and there was this magical system and I wanted these training levels and all this stuff, all of that planning went in ahead of time. So there's kind of 2 different parts of the process. There's the each book part of the process, and I'm very much about, I have my big board and I have my index cards, and I think of scene ideas and I write them down and I start sticking them up there, and then I'm like, ooh, that's a book, and then I start organizing it and figuring out what goes where. So that's the each book process. But then as far as with a series, I spend a lot more time thinking about, what's the magical language and what are the words that are going to work for that, and how do their spells work, and what are the components, and what kind of plants are they going to be growing, and how do they live in their community, and how's their community laid out. So this series has maps, which I was really excited about until I actually had to draw one, and I was like, ooh, maps. But it was fun, because it brought the world to life. So the North Island, like I said, has a higher population. It has more communities. So then I had to think about, well, what does each community do? What's their main crop or resource or export, or how do they trade? Do they have a monetary system? Do they, all of that kind of stuff went into the groundwork. And then I use Scrivener, and not to publish the books, but to contain all my research. And I was a little hesitant because people are like, oh, it's so hard, blur, blur. But it's so awesome and powerful because I can just have all these different tabs and cards and things, and I have a whole series of herbs and what they all do and mean and what they use them for, and then all their magical spell words and the holidays and what they call them, and just all of these different things, and I can just find them in a second.
Yeah.
So I love it. It's just such a great tool.
Josh forced me to learn to use Scrivener. I didn't want to, but he made me do it.
Awesome. It's really awesome.
Such a great, even if you don't use, most people don't use everything that the program can do.
Yeah. How could you?
Yeah. But even if you just use just a little bit, it's way, way useful. Well, more useful than I think Word, because you don't have to go through, whether you're on a PC or Mac, you don't have to go through your filing system and try to remember which file you put your scene in, and you just open up the one program and bam, it's right there.
No, it's been great, especially like I'm saying with the series. It's like things happen to characters in a particular book. They get a certain piece of jewelry, or they get a scar, and then you kind of have to remember when that happened. And so now I'm just able to go into my little character profiles and I update it, and I'm like, oh, in book 3 they find this, in book 2 they do this with their hair, in book 3, and so then when I'm on book 5 and I'm like, oh crap, when did that happen, I can just run back to my little character thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, this happened in this book, so I wouldn't reference it here, but I would reference it there, or whatever. So it helps me keep track of all those little details that become a richer character as they progress through the series. So for a series, I can't imagine not using it. It's just so convenient.
Do you write all your books in the same Scrivener file?
What I do is I have all of my cards that I've written out longhand, and then I go into Scrivener and I start a new folder for the book, and then each of the scenes go in there so that I can kind of keep track as I'm moving through, and I can move scenes around. If I'm like, oh, I feel like that's going to actually happen sooner in the book, then I can just slide that one up, and then I can see what I've got left. And if something ends up not fitting, then I just put it into the next book, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's not actually going to happen in book 3. That's going to happen in book 4. So boom, new folder, put that in there. And it just keeps the flow really good. So, because I'm not a big believer in writer's block. I feel like when I write, I have a schedule, I sit down, I write. And the advantage to the Scrivener thing is I don't come into it going, oh, what am I going to write today? Let's see. I'm going to spend an hour trying to think of where I'm going to go with this. No, I just open that file and I go, I left off here. This is happening next. Go. And it's about just getting the words on the page, because I can edit it. It's not like set in stone. So it's just about the process and the schedule and doing it.
So when you talk about putting the words on the page, do you go off an outline for the books? I mean, you said that you had some of the books kind of planned out ahead of time, or the series arc, obviously, that you know where you're going. So do you sit down, like, my biggest thing over the last couple of years is becoming a very serious plotter, where I'll sit down and I want to know exactly what's going on and what's happening per scene before I start writing. And one of the projects that I'm writing right now is actually the entire book from the beginning to the end is completely outlined out with even things that they say. And I'll sit down and I can easily hit 2,000 to 2,500 words in a sitting, just sitting down and going through the outline. So is that something that you do? Because a lot of writers feel that takes away from the discovery process of the writing, or the fun, I should say.
Yeah, no, I love outlines. I don't know if I get quite, it's hard to say, because sometimes I do get into something really specific. Like sometimes I'll just wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh my God, that's what she's going to say. And, I have to write it down. But it's just a piece of the puzzle. So for me, the outline is kind of the skeleton. And when I sit down to write, I'm fleshing it out on the fly. But I always know where I'm going. Like I never sit down going, gosh, I don't know what's going to happen, because I do know what's going to happen because I have a very specific outline from the beginning of the book to the end. But I didn't outline all 8 books before I started.
Okay.
I just had my series arc, my idea of where the series started and ended, and kind of how, roughly each book would take this much time, this much time, this much time. But when I got into writing it, I'm not big on 5 and 6 page descriptions of things. Mm-hmm. I like a faster pace, and I think that's a leftover from the TV film thing, because
right. That's good though.
Show it. Things are happening, so I think it moves a little quicker. And for people who are really, really about super in-depth world building, they might feel like there's not enough information there. But for me, I feel like there is. And I feel like sometimes you want to reveal things as you go. You don't want to spend all of book one explaining every possible aspect of the village that they live in and exactly how the roads are laid out and what building is closest to what building. And because who cares? I want to know what the characters are doing. And if they run past something that matters, then I'll mention it. You know, so I'm more about that type of world building where it's how the characters interact with it and when it matters. You know, if somebody's got a headache and they have to go to the apothecary, then I'm going to tell you what the apothecary's place looks like. But I'm not going to spend a chapter talking about it in book one just because it's in the village that we're in.
Right.
You know, it has to matter to the story. So for me, the outline is really important. But when I sit down and write and what the characters are saying to each other, that's just happening in the moment. You know, and I love the surprises of things as characters start to develop and grow and get their own thing. And sometimes the hardest days are when I'm trying to force them to do the thing that I said they're supposed to do in my outline. Like, yeah, they're not doing that. They're going to go do that thing. And I'm like, oh, well, that kind of does make more sense. And I have to accept it in my mind, and then I can make it work. So
that's the problem. I like to outline. I'm becoming better with it, but outlines are more likely to slow me down than speed me up as far as writing, because a lot of times I'm trying to fit the outline and shoehorn stuff in there. And then plus I'm very distracted, as anybody knows me knows. I see something shiny and I'm like writing a whole different book. I'm like literally just,
what's happening?
Right in the middle of my sci-fi. I think I'll write a werewolf book.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I think for me, the outline is my safety net. So I know I'm never going to sit down and go, I have no idea what is happening. I have no idea what I'm going to write today. So I think it was book 4 in the series, I got a couple of chapters in and I could not get the ending out of my head. Like I literally couldn't focus on where I was at in the book because everything about the ending was just whirling around. So I wrote the ending, you know, and then I came back and wrote the rest of the book. So but I knew how it was going to end because I had that in my outline, you know. So it's kind of like it's my safety net, but it's not hemming me in. It's not like I feel perfectly comfortable going, well, this wasn't in my outline, you know, just whoosh, adding that in. So it's just a safety net. Yeah.
I think the outlining is very valuable because, well, it's easy to get going down when I started off as a pantser and you get going down some blind alleys and stuff and it's hard to dig yourself back out. So I'm trying to improve my outlining.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that you said just a few minutes ago when we were talking about scene description, is that you don't want to get stuck on describing the apothecary's house and laboratory or whatever in the first chapter just because it's in the village. And I think a lot of new writers that are starting out feel that they have to get everything that they see in their head that they think is cool. They have to get that into the page and they have to get that into the first paragraph because they think that it's cool.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in your travel, in your journey to becoming a writer and then going into a writer, what kind of research and what kind of things did you look at when you were reading and writing this manuscript that you thought, this is what I want to do because I don't want to make all these other mistakes? Did you read? What did you study to get your craft to that level?
Oof. You know, it's so cumulative. I don't know if I could point to a single thing and say this was the thing. I think two things that, you know, some people may consider it in your favor. Some people might consider it a hindrance. But for me, I considered it to be in my favor. My college education was in journalism. I got my degree in journalism. And journalism is all about really writing tight stories. You have so many column inches. You don't have the luxury of just da-da-da-da-da. Oh, I should point out when I say column inches, this was journalism pre-blog sphere. So
right.
Back in that newspaper and cut and paste and that whole operation. And
but it was actually cutting
with
and pasting.
Scissors and glue, not just highlight, burf. So you had to be more succinct. You weren't able to just like, oh, I'm just going to spend 1,000 words talking about what the sun is, you know, playing off the lake. It's like, no, you got to get to the point. Did the, you know, guy drown or did he not drown? What happened?
Right.
So there's that piece of it. And then also I think the film and TV world, you know, if you go back and watch movies, even from the 70s, the pace is so slow because people were still at the point where it's so entertaining to go to the movies. That's
Absolutely.
it.
Right.
But now you go to a film like Atomic Blonde or The Hitman's Bodyguard, and it's like this. It's just happening, you know? And that's kind of how I feel like people's attention spans, people's expectations, they're more into, I want to see this move forward. I want to know what the character's going to do. Don't tell me about all this other crap unless it matters. You know, if they're going to go out and they're going to harvest a specific herb because they need it to do a specific spell, then feel free to tell me about where that grows. But I don't really need to know everything about their agricultural society just because they're an agricultural society. So that's kind of the approach I took. And I think it was just sort of a distilled, you know, through a series of different things. It wasn't necessarily a specific single course or single interaction. It was just kind of, because I love Lord of the Rings and, you know, Harry Potter and all of that kind of stuff, and The Secret Garden and Robert Jordan stuff, you know, and Robert Jordan can spend a whole bunch of pages telling you about a field. Right. About how the bumps in the field, you know, and you're just like, okay, buddy, what's going to happen? But, you know, so I think it's just sort of a little bit of a product of my environment kind of a thing. But I don't know. I just feel like if it matters, it matters. It's kind of this, one of the rules in film is don't show me the gun unless you're going to shoot somebody.
Right.
You know, it's
rule.
like when you see that, when they come into a room and they pan across and there's something, it's like, don't waste time showing me that thing on camera unless it's going to be part of this scene. So that's kind of always rolling around in the back of my head, I think.
Yeah, I think you always make promises to the readers. And so when you introduce a character or a gun or a setting, then you're saying this is in some way important. And then if you never come back to the apothecary, then you're like, why?
Yeah.
You'll still be waiting for the apothecary scene at the end.
Yeah. What's he all about? Like, oh no, I just thought he was a cool guy. I just wanted to tell you about him.
Cool guy. I liked his shoes. He was awesome.
You know, just 3 pages on that guy. He's kind of nifty. He's got a pet mouse. It's cute.
Rick P says, "What if the showing the gun is to purposely throw you off?" So that'd be a red herring. I think that in film they have. Isn't there something called a red herring where you're kind of like little smoke and mirrors going on? So what about?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that kind of goes back to the unreliable narrator kind of idea. You know, in something like Gone Girl, where you have this poor put upon housewife that's, you know, murdered, and then slowly it reveals that she's just like this sociopath. Right. So I think that is a tactic as well. But again, you wouldn't waste time on that unless it was significant to your story. And if it's significant to your story as a form of misdirection, then it makes sense. But if it's just something you're throwing up to fill pages, and it doesn't really pay off as you know, an actual plot direct item or as a misdirection, then it still doesn't really make sense. So it has to be payoff.
Which is
spoiler alert for our traditional after that. If you haven't seen Gone Girl.
Oh yeah, it's been out a while. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
No, because that, and it goes, it kind of goes the other way too. Like some people will purposely point to something in their story and make the reader see it so they can bring it back later and it all makes sense. And on the flip side of that, bringing something up but not making it a big deal. We mentioned Sanderson a while back as the Stormlight Archives, a great series. There are things that he does in those books that you read and you just kind of gloss over, and it's you know, it's not even a paragraph. It might be a sentence, or it might be an action, or something happened over here and he didn't really point your attention to it, but you know that it happened. But then later on in the books, things happen and you're like, that happened way back there. Now that makes sense. And
brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Mind blown.
Yeah, and I like that, because I think, you know, for readers who are, I hate to use the word intellectually wanting an intellectual challenge, but that's kind of what I'm saying. They enjoy that type of thing where you have something that's
like puzzles and stuff,
and then it pays off later, you know, and they're like, oh my gosh, that was the thing. But it's like that moment in, I don't know, I think it's one of the, it's a Mike Myers movie, maybe the first Wayne's World, where it cuts to Chris Farley and he's the security guard, and he's just giving them all this really important information. You're like, this is probably going to, be important later in the story. I can't stand that,
Right.
unless it's a comedy, and that's the idea, which it was in that particular film. But
Right.
it's like if you're in your book and you're like, oh, look, they're all reading this spell. Look at them reading this spell.
Right.
And reading it, and they're
Water spells are important.
spell. And then that's the spell they use at the end. It's like, well, okay, yeah, duh.
Saw
I knew
that coming.
Yeah, I want it to be slightly more subtle than that.
I really like books and even TV series like Game of Thrones does this really well, where they leave it up into interpretation a lot of times. Like they don't actually come out and spell out what's happening until much later, if they even do that. And you have to kind of infer through all the information that by reading or watching the series. I know this is happening. They're not coming out and saying it's happening, but I know that it's there.
Yeah.
That's the kind of that's a lot of kind of the plot elements and things that I like to see in writing, like you said, for a more intellectually challenged read, where you can read that book and you go, this is happening. He's not saying it's happening, but I know it's happening. That's really cool.
Right. So it gives you different levels. Someone can just be reading through something superficially and be entertained. Somebody can be reading between the lines, digging a little deeper, and have more of experience. So it's kind of nice to have those kind of layers for people. Some people who read 5 books a day or whatever, I don't know what that is about, but some people do, and they're just you cannot tell me that they're getting in deeply into that. That's a skim at best.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do most of my listening or reading on Audible. So I usually do maybe a book every couple of weeks on Audible. And then I have one on my Kindle on my bedside table. And usually that takes me like a month to read. But I'm a very, very slow reader.
Yeah, I just started doing audiobooks. So I haven't, just with the Lake Effect series, I just have the first book is audio. And then I finish that and then do the fantasy series. But it's fun. I did a lot of voiceover work in my 20s, and so it's fun to do narration and do voices and stuff. That series has parents with a Minnesota accent, so that's hilarious to me.
So you say, did you do your own narration then, or?
I did.
Awesome. So you're officially way more talented than we are.
I can do mine, but nobody would listen.
Josh can do voices. We do voices, but then people tell us to stop. So.
And they tell me the voices.
Actually, I've been using a fake voice this entire show.
Have you?
I know what Josh really sounds like. It's like,
is it a really high?
I
really sound like this.
It's kind of like Elmo if Elmo wasn't like macho.
Right.
The non-macho Elmo voice.
The non-macho Elmo.
Yeah. If you can imagine whatever that is, that's
pretty awesome.
We should do a show with puppets and then completely change our voices the entire show and just see how it goes.
Fantastic. Yeah.
That would be good.
That would be really good.
Voices in your head don't count. Can
Oh, no.
I have lots of those.
We can't hear those. That's just you.
Yeah, it's just
well, we are coming to the end of the hour, and
it's
been a really good show. It's gone by really quickly, which is always fun. Can you share with our viewers and listeners where we can find out more information about you and your writing?
Yes, absolutely. My books are all available wide, so Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, iTunes, Kobo, all that. And my website is ruescorner.com, R-U-E-S. RuesCorner.com, and I have Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and Twitter and YouTube and whatever. I'm so not into social media, but I realize it's important, so it's all out there.
All the things.
Well, thank you, Rue, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you and discussing young adult dinosaur fantasy. You said pterodactyl, and I was like, "That's the coolest thing."
Pterodactyls are awesome.
I may have ever seen. Yep.
Spelled just like it sounds. For those of you that don't know. Everybody that watched this live, thanks for coming and hanging out with us. It's been a blast in the live chat as usual. If you have not subscribed or followed us on Facebook, go to I think you just type in Keystroke Medium. You can find our page and our group. The group is more active than the page. Come and hang out. There's shenanigans there. And next week we are off for the 11th. we are taking a break for 9/11, and then we'll be
Yes.
back on the 18th if Ralph can get his business together. Ralph, talking at you, buddy, our other co-host, who is sometimes
just because he's in England and it's like 2 a.m. whenever we do our shows.
That's
That's
right.
not our
Oh,
fault.
geez. Yeah, that's rough.
So we should be back on the 18th with Ralph and Scott. I'll be off that day, but then we'll be back finishing out the month. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us. If you want to hang out for just a minute, Rue, we'll wrap up and do a little pre-show. For Scott Moon, I am Josh Hayes. We have been live with Rue. Thanks everybody for coming and watching and hanging out with us. Make sure you come back next time as we talk about reading, writing, and everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a great Monday.
See you.